You know, we really care about families here at Northgate. And so one of the things we do is during the summer, our Northgate Kids Connect schedule is that we have the kids come in and worship with us. This was the first Sunday of our summer schedule, so they were in here. You saw the slide dismissing them now they go to a special program. And I love it when we have the kids in here. In fact, I like it when the kids are in here for the whole service too. I remember those times as a kid. I distinctly remember when I was in 4th grade, my brother was in 2nd grade, and my dad was the pastor of Valley View Church in the Los Angeles Basin area, and he stopped in the middle of his message because my brother and I were sitting, in the back, and we were acting up, and he called us out. He said, "Jimmy, Marky, come down here and sit by your mother." And he waited until we got down here and sat with my mother. My mother played the organ, so she sat on the front row. And we had to come and sit with my mother, and that's where we sat for a number of weeks, for sure. Those are distinct memories for me. And those aren't bad memories. Those are memories. My father wasn't angry. Nothing was ever said about that afterwards. We were not told that we had to sit with Mom on the front row for weeks afterwards. We just did. And those are great learning experiences, and I encourage you, parents, grandparents, your kids are really important, and we deeply care about them here at Northgate Church. I want to start this morning by reading the words of Psalm 78, where the songwriter, his name is Asaph, says this: "Listen, dear friends, to God's truth. Bend your ears to what I want to tell you. I'm chewing on the morsel of a proverb. I'll let you in on the sweet old truths. Stories we've heard from our fathers, counsel that we learned at our mother's knee. We're not keeping this to ourselves. We're passing it along to the next generation. God's fame and fortune, the marvelous things that God has done. He planted a witness among us. He set his word firmly among us. And then he commanded our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and our ancestors to teach it to their children, so the next generation would know, and all the generations that would follow, that they would know the truth and tell the stories, so that their children can trust in God and never forget what God has done." The basis of family rests on a truth that the people of Israel repeated over and over again. And if you were with an Orthodox Jewish family today, one of the things that would be said in that home, one of the things that would be repeated often, is something that we refer to as the Shema. And I would like you, we're going to put it on the screen, I would like you to read it with me this morning, because it is the foundation of our worship, it is the foundation of our families, it is the foundation of where we start in a faith journey with Jesus, who leads us into the presence of God. Can we read this together? "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." We're talking about family, and this morning I'm going to talk about Sinnerlings. My wife, I don't know where she heard this, but at one point my wife heard somebody say, a speaker at a conference, read it in a book, I don't know where it came from. She repeated, if you put a husband and a wife together who are sinners, you're going to have Sinnerlings. And that became something that was said often in our home, between each other, to other families, because, well, let's face it, we're all born sinners because of the sin in the garden with Adam and Eve. We have that heritage. And so I just want you to know this morning that I feel totally inadequate to stand up here and talk about this. Inadequate because, well, I'm quite far removed from being a parent. I'm still a grandparent, but I'm removed from being a parent. And I try to put myself in situations on a regular basis where I'm with kids and teenagers. I come every Wednesday night that I'm able. I come to our Northgate Kids environment because I want to be around our kids. They're important. They're important to me. They're important to us as a church. They are the church today. And I put myself with our teenagers. I'm here for our youth group. And in a few weeks, I'm going to go with the teenagers that are going to the Life Conference in Indianapolis. I want to be with our teenagers. This is important to me, but I still feel inadequate. And to a great degree, I feel guilty. In preparing these messages, the first book that I read about preparing for this, before we even decided that we were going to do this series on family, which this was put on the calendar way back before Christmas, I read a book, and after I read the book, I sent a message to all my kids and apologized because I felt guilty about what I did do and what I didn't do and what I wish I would have done. So I just want you to know that I'm sharing what I share this morning from that kind of a position, from being inadequate and feeling a little guilty about my own parenting. So Paul, in his letter to the church at Ephesus, is most pointed about addressing husbands and wives and parents. So he starts out, and we've labeled it chapter 6, but it was all run together in one letter. He starts out this way. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment that was given with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." And then he goes on and he says, "Fathers," and I hope you understand that we have such limited language and English that express things, and so the best translation we can get is fathers, but it's a broader term than that. It really should say parents, but in a patriarchal society that this was written in, and how the words were chosen and how it's been translated over the centuries, that comes through. So I put parents in parentheses. Parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And then he goes on and he says, slaves. And let's just pause here. All of you have been kids at one time. And there are times when you felt like a slave. And there are times that parents treat our children like slaves. And that's, human nature. But when Paul switches here, he's really addressing the household. Because in the culture that Paul wrote in, the home was made up of more than a mother and a father and children. There were servants and slaves. There were other people there. And so he's addressing that whole. And he's saying this is how the family ought to be operating. Not only the parents and their blood children that they've given birth to, but everybody in the home ought to be following this kind of a pattern. He says, so slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord and not just people, because. And this because is really important here. Because you know that the Lord will reward each one of you for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. So now he's addressed the slaves. He's going to turn the tables. And masters, that would be the husband. That would also be the wife, who might have slaves that report to her. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Treat your slaves in the same way. This echoes, as a little rabbit trail here, this echoes a lot of what Paul addresses when he writes a letter that we call Philemon in the New Testament, which is one of the best handbooks, one of the best set of verses in all of the New Testament, in all of the Bible, about how employees and employers ought to treat each other. It's an amazing letter. And if you're an employee or an employer, you ought to go read that letter. Because what it says is that respect and sincerity and pure motives are really, really important. That's what Paul's referring to here. So he goes on and he says, don't threaten them. Masters, don't threaten the people under you. Don't threaten them. And this goes for the children too. Don't threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Wow. No favoritism. That one's really hard. That one's really hard. So for the next few minutes, I want to try to break some of this down and be really, really practical. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I have way more slides than I normally do this morning because I just have a lot that I want to share with you. It's going to go quickly. Some of you are going to try to take notes. I promise you that when the service is over, you're going to be offered a sheet of paper that has printing on both sides, that has everything on it that I'm going to share with you this morning. That doesn't mean you shouldn't write it down. If you remember best by writing something down, please write it down. But don't feel guilty about not getting something or anything like that, because we're going to give you a cheat sheet before you leave. One of the things that I've learned in the last 9 months of reading and preparing for this series is I've learned something that I wish I would have known a long time ago. There are really 4 stages of parenting. The first stage starts at birth and goes till about 5 years old, and it's called the discipline stage. That's when basically we're teaching our kids practices and disciplines for their lives. You know, as basic as you use the toilet, not the diaper, right? The next phase is instruction, and that goes till about 12 years old. And that's where we're teaching them, and we're instructing them. That's the time where, you know, there are a lot of things that fit in to life, and we're showing them what life is like, and we're helping them learn those things. And then starting, you know, about 12, 13 years old, we enter into the coaching phase. And I really hesitated putting that it ends at 18. I said 28 because, you know, I didn't want to put just 18. Here's my problem. 18 is when we say that somebody becomes an adult. But folks, I know 48-year-old men that aren't adults yet because of the way they act. And so I really hesitated on that, so I played with this. But really, till about age 18 is the coaching stage. And then you enter into the friendship stage. And that's where I am at with my children and their spouses. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't experienced that yet, it's a lot of fun. There are some challenges, but there's a lot of fun. So let's go back and look at these a little more closely. Discipline. The discipline stage is when we have to recognize that rules without relationships result in rebellion. And so when we're disciplining our kids, it's really important that we develop a relationship with them. And we develop a relationship with them that goes deep, that's more than a surface relationship. Because when we're disciplining our children, they need to know what we say around here a lot. We need to know that we love them and accept them. We're just not affirming their behavior. That's what discipline is. We love them, we cherish them, we value them. But, I can't affirm the fact that you're laying on the floor in the grocery store kicking and screaming and throwing a temper tantrum. That's not acceptable. I can't affirm that. You have to have that kind of a relationship. And what plays into this, and that I didn't do this very well, is that disciplining with the relationship in mind is not the same as disciplining with your reputation in mind. You see, let's face it, folks, if the kid is laying on the floor in the grocery store, throwing a temper tantrum, kicking and screaming, the first reaction I have is, I got to protect my reputation. And we forget about the relationship. We have to discipline with the relationship in mind and not our reputation. And we have to think far enough in advance and talk. Parents need to talk with each other far enough in advance that we know how to respond instead of react. We have to respond instead of react. If all we do is react, then they're getting our knee jerk, they're getting our temper, they're getting our anger, they're getting our frustration. But when we think about and we figure out how to respond, it produces far more positive results. Moving on to the instruction phase. In instructing kids, we need to remember that the payback punishment system doesn't work very well. When a kid does something and then, we get payback by saying, okay, now you have to go and do this and this and this, and we list it out. I remember to this day, I can get dressed and undressed really fast because I had a payback system that happened to me when I was a kid. My brother and I missed the bus to school one day. My parents had to take us. When we got home from school that day, my dad said, okay, boys, before you can have supper tonight, you have to get in your pajamas, come out here to the living room and show me you're in your pajamas, go back and put your school clothes on. You do that 50 times before you get supper tonight. 50 times. And he had, a list, and he was keeping count. Now I remember that, but I also remember that, that was my dad getting payback. I had to stop my schedule and take you to school, and I'm holding you responsible. You're not going to do it again 50 times. You're going to get dressed and undressed. And it was then, in that instance, and the reason I put this on the screen, I learned that sorry is not a complete sentence. Because I just said, sorry. And my dad said, sorry for what? Sorry for what, and what are you going to do about it? To just have somebody say, I'm sorry, isn't really enough. I'm sorry that I wasn't ready on time and that I made you change your schedule in order to take me to school. I will not be late again. That is an apology. That's saying sorry. But sorry by itself, that wasn't acceptable. The next thing I want to just point out in the instruction phase of parenting is that pre-assigning a consequence may not be the best approach. In other words, saying if you do this or you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. May not be best because it's like announcing, I actually expect you to mess up. I actually expect you to mess up. Now, parents, please, and grandparents and aunts and uncles, don't ever expect kids to be perfect. But I also think it's risky to say, if you mess up, this is what's going to happen. Maybe the better part in the instruction phase is to say, if you mess up, we're going to talk. And then you take action. Then you decide what consequences look like. Because consequences are important. And I'm in no way suggesting that there should not be consequences when kids disobey. Not at all. But the consequence should not be greater than the learning that needs to take place. The coaching phase then kicks in, and in the coaching phase, we have to be really careful that we don't fix or rush to help everything. You know, we used to refer to parents as helicopter parents. They're always hovering. Well, now we refer to the parents as lawnmower parents. They just clear everything out of the way in front of their kids. Not sure that's really the best. Because during the coaching years, don't we want to give them the opportunity to begin practicing the things that they're going to need to practice as adults? Isn't that the phase of life where we're saying, okay, we've worked on discipline and we've worked on instruction, and now we're going to help you. We're not going to fix everything. We're not going to rush in to help. And I remember sometimes when I did this right, I remember one of my kids having a crisis at high school, and they came home, they told me about it, and I said, do you want me to go into school and talk about this? No, Dad, I'm going to handle this on my own. Great. Tell me what you're going to do. Let's talk about it. Let me coach you. There's a reason why coaches get penalized when they come out on the field or go out on the court. They got to call timeout to do that. And there's a sense in which I think especially we as Christian parents, we get so wrapped up in protecting our reputation instead of the relationship that we rush in to fix everything. When in reality, what we're trying to do is prepare them for the future. That means we have to think. And preparing and thinking about the future is tough. So this is a hard one. I wish I'd have done this better, but don't freak out. Don't freak out. I remember watching something take place in the church that we were a part of in Indiana in the early 1980s. We had 3 kids. I think 2 of them were still in diapers, but we had 3 kids. And I remember watching an event take place in our church life where one of the girls in our high school youth group got pregnant. And I remember how that was responded to by her parents, by her grandparents who went to that church, by the youth pastor, by the church. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't nice. People freaked out. And I remember having a conversation with Lois and saying, if our girls ever come home and say they're pregnant, we're not going to freak out. I say, they'll probably tell you first. I said that to my wife. I was hoping they would. So you can warn me, but when they do that, I don't want to freak out. I don't want to react. I want to respond. And the reality was that I decided at that point that if that ever happened, I was going to do everything within my power to give them a great big hug and say, wow, God has trusted you with a life. It's not the way I would have chosen, but God has trusted you with a life. That's what I wanted them to hear from me. I didn't want to freak out. And I don't want you to freak out. I've tried to practice that even as a pastor. to not freak out and not overreact, but to respond. So this is what happens in the discipline, instruction, and coaching phases. And this is so much more emphasized in the coaching phase, but it applies to all three. We end up living under a microscope. This is parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. This is older nieces and nephews. This is the family. And so I just want to point out some things that happen when we're living under a microscope. Number one is authenticity is very, very important. Intent, our intention is basically irrelevant. It's how we act and what we say that's important. It's our actions. It's the words that come out of our mouth. Even though we didn't intend to say it that way, even though we didn't intend to do that, that becomes irrelevant because they're more interested in our authenticity. And in the reality, our kids, especially our teenagers, they can smell hypocrisy from miles away. They didn't have to see it, they smell it. So be authentic. Number two, watch your vocabulary. I get frustrated with parents who are trying to be cool, who are trying to use the slang of the day. Slang is destructive, folks, no matter which way you look at it. Language is important. The words we choose are important. One of the descriptions of Jesus is that he is the Word. He is the language. And our language needs to represent the Jesus that we say we follow. And that means that we need to eliminate expletives. You know what expletives are? They're the swear words. And my friends, we just need to eliminate them from our vocabulary. I realize I'm going to offend everybody in the room. But my personal opinion, this is my personal opinion, is somebody who chooses to use an expletive is showing their lack of intelligence to think of a better way to express themselves. Because there are a lot better ways to do it. And as a Jesus follower, I don't want to succumb to the pressure of the world to use expletives that flow out of people's mouths faster than water coming out of a faucet. Our vocabulary is really important. The way we spend our time is important. Worship and work and family, they go in harmony together. The whole Old Testament is a story of a people, a nation, that when they were walking with Jesus, they worshiped and they worked and their families were woven together. There was not a category or a box for each one, but they were woven together. I struggle with families who don't understand that the dad out working when he's absent from his family, that's not a category about all by itself. Work is not a category all by itself. Work is actually worship. Family is worship. Family time is worship. Those are linked together. In her book that Edith Schaefer wrote years ago, 40 years ago, What is the Family? She spends chapters and chapters making her case that our families are woven together, and they're woven together not only from the nuclear sense, the mom, the dad, and the kids that they've produced, but in a greater sense in the family of God, and we're all in this together. We all live in this together. And then we have to be really careful about the way we treat our money. Do your kids know about money? Do they know about your family finances? Oh, they don't need to know all the dirty details. But I hope that they're seeing that you live by the process of that. What we do in a family with our money is that we give, we save, and we live. You see, most of us do it exactly opposite. We live, we take care of all the bills first, we put whatever we can in savings account, And then if there's anything left over, we give that away. And here's the reality of our church. You know, we have over 150 giving units in our church. Families or individuals, we refer to them as giving units. And if the average income in our church family is the same as the average income in Wapello County, you know, even if we were giving 5% to the work of the church, and I realize that some of you are generous outside of the church to other ministries, and I encourage that, I applaud that. But even if we were giving 5% to the church, our budget would be 3 times what it is. And do your kids see you giving? Do they know that you give to the Lord? Do they know that you give to other nonprofit, life-fulfilling, need-meeting organizations? Next is about relationships. I mean, we're living under a microscope, so we got to talk about all this. We have to model conflict resolution. If all our kids see is mom and dad disagreeing and they don't see us resolving that conflict, they're not getting the whole story. And they think that conflict by itself is normal. But conflict and conflict resolution go hand in hand. If we're not modeling that, then our kids aren't learning how they're going to do it. And this is especially important during the coaching years. They need to see how conflict is resolved. We need to model it for them. We need to learn to say in our relationships that it's no for now, but not forever. You know, I struggled with this, okay? When I was with Missions Outreach, a missions organization, I had opportunity to travel all over the world, and I could have taken my wife with me on many of those trips without any extra cost, without any personal cost. The mission would have paid for it. Actually, the travel agency would have paid for it, but it would have been covered. But we had 3 kids at home, and we had to learn to say no for now, but not forever. No for now, but not forever. When it comes to relationships, the best thing that parents can do is love their spouse. The best thing you can do to teach your kids about relationships is love their mom, love their dad. And you need to show them that you're a student of your spouse, that you're still learning about your spouse. None of you in here would even dare say that, even if you've been married 50 plus years, would dare say that I know everything about my spouse. You don't. You're still learning. That's part of the adventure of a marriage, is you're still learning about your spouse. So be a student of your spouse. Another thing that happens living under the microscope is we have to respond to authority correctly. This is a big one for me. This is a big one for me. If someone cannot respond correctly to the authority they can see, please don't try to convince me that they can respond correctly to the authority of God whom they cannot see. And we as parents have to model that first. We have to model that first. That's not a principle that we can teach. That is an action that we have to model. They catch that from us. We don't teach that to them. So I just want to remind you of this. It's about habits. There's a number of studies that are out there that say the habits that our children see us engaged in, they multiply by 4. Dad, I'm just going to say, if you love to come home from work and pull a beer out of the fridge, your kids are going to multiply that by 4. They're going to come home when they get to be that age, and they'll pull 4 beers out of the fridge. You know, this one really hits close to home for me. You know, if the speed limit is 55 and you're doing 60, your kids are going to do 64. They multiply it by 4. It's over and over again. And we have seen that in study after study after study. Our kids watch us. They think they're better than us, especially during the coaching years. We don't know anything. We're dumb. It's not till the friendship years that they begin to realize that maybe we were a little smarter than they thought after all. And they multiply it by 4. Parents, be careful. Grandparents, be careful. Aunts, uncles, be careful. What they see you doing, they're going to copy, but they're going to multiply it. All right, I promise you we're getting to the end. I told you. I told the tech team I thought we'd be out of here by noon. The next thing is we look at the friendship stage. The friendship stage. The friendship stage, this is where we wait and pray. Because we've prepared them, we've disciplined, we've instructed, we've coached them. Now they're on their own. We wait and we pray. And we try our best not to interfere. We try our best not to blurt out the advice, but to offer the advice. That's hard. I'm really good at the bottom one. I can tell stories. And I love to tell stories about how God has provided and what has happened to me and the things I've learned, just like I did when I told you about my father saying, Jimmy, Marky, come sit on the front row by your mom. I can tell stories, but not interfering and learning how to offer advice instead of just blurt it out, that's hard. That's really hard. So just remember this. And I'm going to ask the people who've been with me at Tri-State not to yell. What you say is important, but what you do screams. They know that I would do this in staff meeting at Tri-State. For 25 years I did this. And when I got to the word screams, everybody stood up and let it belt. And, we broke windows and all kinds of wonderful stuff like that. But what you do screams. What you say is important, but what you do screams. So how does Paul close this up? After he gives us this advice, and after I've tried to break this down and make it as practical as I know how this morning, he says this, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. Yeah, it's okay to pray and cry and weep over your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, the kids next door. It's okay. Go before God and beg him for those kids. See, this goes back. This goes back to what Paul has already laid as the foundation earlier in this letter when he says, be careful. Be careful how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Here's the reality, my friends. We have an enemy, the devil, who prowls around like a roaring lion, who wants nothing more than to destroy your family, your marriage, and your kids, your grandkids, your nieces and nephews. That is his objective, to deceive us and to send us spiraling to failure. That's what the devil wants. That's what Satan wants. And it's going to take everything we have. We have to be careful. We have to be very careful to live as wise people, not as foolish people. Because the days we live in are really evil, and our kids are being tempted to go down paths that did not even exist 10 years ago because of what's available to them on their smart devices. And we shape that. And it's how we react, or maybe we should say respond. It's when we resist freaking out. It's when we learn to coach and instruct and discipline in a Christ-like way that we begin to see the attributes of Jesus fleshed out in our kids. Not because we're doing something right, but because God is gracious and kind and loving, and we're pursuing Him. So, my friends, please, can we just for a moment reflect on how our community would change if we started doing these things right? It would be dramatic. It would be dramatic. We would have a voice to speak for marriage between one man and one woman in a lifelong covenant commitment. We would have a voice to speak about singleness that can be lived in a holistic, God-driven way, because singleness, Paul says, is actually the better choice. We would have the opportunity to speak about the abuse that happens to children in our culture and the horrible things that are happening because of trafficking and sexual abuse and drug abuse and all kinds of substance abuse. Friends, we need a voice to speak into that, and we don't have that right now because the world looks at us and calls us hypocrites because all the statistics that apply to people outside the church also factor inside the church, and we've got to change that. We have to change that. Don't wait for somebody else. Now, begin today to live as wise, not as foolish people, because the days are evil. That's our challenge, and that's what I would like to pray for you. Again, when you leave, we'll have a handout that has all this list for you already prepared. Heavenly Father, I feel so inadequate. And there are so many things about my own parenting that I don't feel right about. But I believe that what has been shared here this morning is true and right. And if anything has been said that should not have been said, I pray that you'd blow it away, that you'd erase it from our minds. But Father, the truth that has been spoken, I pray that you'd brand into our brains and our hearts so that we would be enabled and strengthened and that we would have the courage to follow you as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, as teachers, as leaders of children and youth. And I pray, Lord, for the people in this room who are all children themselves. And if their parents are still living, if their grandparents are still living, if they have aunts and uncles that are still here, Lord, may we honor them. May we learn how to fold them into our families. And so now, Father, would you stand for this, please? Now, Father, I pray your benediction over this people. Whether they're in the room or whether they're watching us online, may all of us be filled with your Spirit so that we would walk out of here today with a new commitment to follow you and to follow you well. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.